Hi everybody, welcome back to the FIS X Cubo podcast. It's Mia here from FIS, and today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Charles Banks, Director and Co-Founder of The Food People, and Kelly Dowson, MD of Good Sense Research. Hi guys, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on. For those of you who haven't heard of The Food People or GSR, The Food People is a global trends and ideas agency providing F&B businesses with trends, analytics and insight. And GSR is a specialist food and beverage market research and data analysis agency. For this month's podcast, I'm going to be picking their brains about what we've termed the post-COVID era. With Charles's in-depth knowledge of the latest trends, combined with Kelly's insight into the consumer mind, we are hopefully going to be able to paint a picture of what the future holds for the F&B market post-COVID. We've decided today to explore three key areas: eating out, health and plant-based, and we're going to address each in turn to unearth the habits and trends that have been surrounding these areas. So Charles, let's start with eating out. I think this is actually something that we haven't really been doing very much of in the last few months. Obviously, we've all been in lockdown, and suddenly eating out seems to have become a bit of a thing of the past. And you know, we spoke in a previous podcast about the rise of the in-experience, people more and more eating in home and having DIY experiences within the safety of their own home. With the rise of this experience, Charles, do you feel that eating out is a thing of the past?
Well, thanks. That's a great question, Mia, and firstly to say it's a great pleasure to join you both today on this particular podcast. To answer your question, no, I don't think so. And I think whilst the appetite to eat out now may be muted due to the confidence and associated worry about off the back of COVID-19, I think a restaurant experience out of home delivers against so many of our broader human needs that are more difficult to get when you eat in home or have an experience, if you like. I think that desire for the discovery, really, I think as human beings, we want to discover new cuisines. We want to find out. We have a thirst for knowledge. We've got that desire to discover new flavors and cuisines from across the world. And also to feed off the energy that is basic human connection, really, whether that be from diners or front of house teams are always hugely knowledgeable, chefs and other people in the room, and you just don't get that same energy, if you like, in your own home. It's a different experience. And also, of course, the stimulation that comes from different chefs or restaurants' perspective. They're all providing food and drink to deliver our basic needs of sustenance, but each one has a different perspective, and it's that kind of discovery that goes with that. Each one has got a different lens, and there's something really quite exciting and intriguing about that. So I passionately believe that this is definitely not the end for eating out. It's about a new era in how we eat out. But I don't know, Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
I suppose from a consumer perspective, Charles, what we have seen is that I think the word experience is maybe in its infancy, because when we asked a group of consumers, over 100 people, they pretty much all of them hadn't heard of it. 96% it was a new term. But I think actually, there's some restaurants out there that have adapted to lockdown really well. So some, fine dining restaurants that have been trying to create that experience by having the meal packs and whatnot delivered to people to create that. But I do think that, that was very much fit for purpose at the time. As we start to see places open up again now, people will be craving that human contact. And that, pre-COVID, a lot of the research work that we were doing it wasn't just about the food, it was about the whole experience, the atmosphere in restaurant, the decor. So I do think that, experience has been a great way for restaurants to adapt. And I think that there's potentially a market for that. But I do think that consumers will be looking to get back to eating out for sure.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I'm glad that you both said that, because, with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, I think everyone has been really excited. As you said, they have missed that experience that you get from eating in, Charles. So, I think you're right that it's not something that it is something that you're going to return to as the lockdown releases. So if restaurants and the food service have been forced to adapt in order to survive, they've been shifting towards this retail-based offer. You know, Kelly, that you mentioned, the DIY meal kits, transferring their service of providing food into something that you can buy in a kit. Which of the many new developments, Charles, that we've seen can we expect to stay around, and which ones do you think will, go as quickly as they came?
Well, I think one thing that's really, really clear is that the old restaurant business model has to change and adapt in the now, but also it needs to be resilient into the future, whatever the future holds. And I would definitely expect the food service to continue to adapt, and those clear lines of clear demarcation that have existed for years, of generations really, between food service and retail will continue to evolve and continue to blur. And those restaurants that have a really strong differentiated proposition, I believe there'll be a continued opportunity. And as Kelly alluded to a moment ago, it may be a whole new channel for selling the likes of at-home restaurant meal kits. But many of the restaurants that have delivered that have responded in the moment as a desperate need, as a response to COVID. And what I'd expect them to do is to evolve those business models, such as adopting either a dark or a cloud kitchen approach to making those types of meal kits, rather than using prime, very expensive A3 real estate to create kits which can in effect be made in not such a premium location. And this shock is bringing a whole new competitive set. As an example, from a retailer perspective, as an example, food service suppliers entering the direct-to-consumer space, high-quality products, specialist products. They've already got the website and the e-commerce set up, and the ability to deliver at home, which is crucial. And Warren's on the Pass is a really great example of that. They're a butcher down near me in Launceston, and they provide a lot of restaurants in London with their beef and their lamb. And they were aging meat. They had £1 million worth of stock when all restaurants closed. So they very quickly adapted their business model to deliver direct to consumer. And now they have a whole new business that they didn't have before, because you're getting restaurant quality meat. I can get Ickoi aged, branded. I can get Ledbury branded beef delivered to my home. So I think that's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah,
and I would also expect the restaurant space to continue to evolve to help spread risk. An outlet that delivers dine-in, takeout, delivery, deli, meal kits and coffee in all, in one sort of evolving space to spread risk for the operator. I spoke to Michelin star chef, Indian chef Atul Kutcher only yesterday for a webinar that we're doing. And he said that flexibility and the ability to adapt in this moment are absolutely key. And if I was really honest, I think that we're at the beginning of the change, not at the end. So I think there's a lot of shift yet to come. Kelly, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so just to build on that, Charles, I agree with everything you've said. I think the important thing to reference here is that when we've asked consumers, they're relatively forgiving, I guess, but 64% of them do expect the same level of quality in a restaurant as you would get in a DIY meal kit. And I think that's just really important for restaurants to consider how they're executing that kit. And I suppose for the bigger chains, that we see branching into retail, it's how do you make sure that is of great quality? And I personally think simplicity is key. So keeping it simple, the simple products going onto shelf in retail, there's less changes to the process, you're more likely to get that consistency, and you don't want to devalue your brand longer term by putting a substandard product on shelf in retail. So right. I think it's really important that people are considering that. But like I say, 64% isn't 100, so there is some people that do expect it to not be as good. So yeah, I think it's just important for people to consider that for sure.
And supporting those propositions with the how-to guides and the videos, which I know a lot of the chefs are doing, But if your expectation, if you've spent, £100 on a meal kit or £80 on a meal kit, and your level of expectation is the same from a food delivery point of view as if you're in a restaurant, that you've got to support the home cook with all the kind of tips and tricks and techniques to be able to deliver against that expectation, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the main takeaway from this particular section is that the consumers are obviously willing and open to these changes. They're enjoying these changes to restaurants bringing their products to the home, and it's just whether the product is implemented and taken to the market correctly, about whether it will succeed or whether it will kind of die and go as quickly as it came, sort of thing. But we know that the government is encouraging consumers to get out the house and to support their local businesses and eat out more. Obviously, with the introduction of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I know that some consumers have got different perspective on it. Some of them are loving it, and others are quite still cautious about going out. Charles, do you think that this scheme has worked from the government's part? Have consumers responding to their attempts to encourage eating out? Do you think they're eating out more as a result?
I do. I mean, I think the numbers speak for themselves. 35 million meals in 2 weeks and 85,000 participating establishments. So in terms of an incentive to restore confidence and to get people eating out again, to stimulate that habit, because it's the habit that's broken, and anyone that's had a habit and knows that once you break it, then it's much easier then to go without it. And I think that's what we need to do, is to stimulate that habit. So from that point of view, I would say yes, I think it has worked. It has also shifted the spend from Thursday to Sunday into Monday to Wednesday, and in many cases has shifted that peak earlier in the week. But I'm sure everyone would agree, with 1.8 million jobs in the food and drink sector, and a high number of those being low paid, they've been furloughed since the coronavirus crisis. We all hope that this scheme will encourage diners to return to their pre-crisis dining habits, and obviously the test of whether this has worked will come in September when they're withdrawn, but we'll see. I mean, the conversation that I had with Atul yesterday, he described Rishi Sunak as a genius. That's one chef's perspective. I know there are others, but that was just his view.
Yeah. I think, when we've asked customers on our panel, 83% of people have taken advantage of this scheme. And, personally, I have.
Likewise.
It's so great. You can almost eat out cheaper than you can eat at home. And I think it has definitely got people back into the mindset that, 2 months ago, people were really nervous to leave their home, rightly so. And I think this is a really, really good way to get them back out. I suppose conflicting to that, I have read a few reports of restaurants pulling out of the scheme because I personally know it's absolutely a real challenge to get booked in anywhere now, and has been throughout the whole of August. So there's been a lot of disappointed customers that haven't been able to get in and take advantage of the scheme. And I think that restaurants that have been dormant for 2 months and then thrown back into this, I think there's been a few teething problems in some places around speed of service and whatnot, because they have been so busy, not necessarily got everybody back off furlough. And I think that a few restaurants have seen negative reviews, which I think is disappointing. I saw Adam Hanlon had made a comment about he'd had a 1-star review because somebody couldn't get into the restaurant, and I think things like that are challenging, and I hope that customers can be quite forgiving of those things, because this scheme has been done for the greater good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And Charles, you mentioned at the end of what you were saying that the success will really come when we see what happens when the scheme is withdrawn. Do you think that it will make a long-term change, or do you think consumers are just going to revert to their old ways and start saving money again, staying in and not going out again?
I think if the trajectory of the virus continues as is at the moment, it will nudge consumers back towards pre-crisis eating habits. Because whilst I'm an expert in the industry, I'm also a consumer, and like everyone else, I felt really nervous about going out. What would it be like? How seriously would industry have taken the guidance and so on? And I needed, like anyone else, the push to go and experience experience that for the first time, feel reassured, and then, to take my family then back into that environment. But there are so many bigger factors that could affect this, things like regional second waves, government policy, obviously employment as furlough comes to an end, the broader economic recovery, but also known factors such as the cold nights. This alone could make some of the practices that we've seen and accepted over the summer months, like queuing outside and eating outside, very, very different. So there are some knowns coming down the track that I think we need to be aware of, but there's also still quite a lot of uncertainty. But if it continues as is at the moment, I believe it will nudge consumers back. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that on the whole, customers we're obviously limited, a lot more open to what we can do now than we were a couple of months ago, but there's still limitations around there. So people are looking for a change of scenery from their own home. And I think that, that there's a lot less holidays going on at the moment. So I think people are looking to get out and have that change, and I think that will continue whilst there are other restrictions in play around travel. Going out for something to eat is a desirable thing for many people to do with their family. So I think that taking into consideration what you said about all those other factors which will impact it, I think it's about balance, and I think there's pros and cons to all those things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks, guys. So, we've said that we think that eating out is going to go on to the future. We think it's going to stay up on the rise. People do enjoy it. Charles, what are the hot areas? What do, providers need to be and producers need to be looking at? What are the things to watch?
I think if I was starting out right now, which is probably a good way to think about the question, and in consideration of the market conditions, I'd definitely be looking at a fairly simple and differentiated food or product proposition, something that is more difficult to create well at home. And we've seen a surge in fried chicken concepts, all of them quite differentiated in their proposition and their flavors and the associated cuisines. But doing fried chicken at home, of course you can do it, but it's a real faff. It's quite messy to do. So something that's more difficult to create easily at home. Food, of course, that will travel and deliver, because getting food to where people are is even more important than it was pre-COVID. Obviously, food that's craveable and accessible in terms of price is going to be a key consideration as we move forward. And also half an eye on health and wellness, lighter eats, plant-based and vegan offerings as well. But I think this is also a great time to challenge some of the pre-virus norms around, if we just take the example of premises and location, looking at alternative ways, either through markets or pop-ups, thinking about community, local delivery. Again, I referenced my conversation with Atul yesterday, and he was saying how important the connection more than ever before with the local community is. His community-based restaurants are doing far better than his city ones at the moment, and they're really trying to foster those relationships. But also how you can collaborate with others, local suppliers, local producers, to offer a unique offer or experience. And when we look back at some of the cuisine work that we've been doing as part of our Future Food collaboration between the Food People and Good Sense Research, some of the cuisines that have fared particularly well in the COVID era are those that are familiar and comforting, but those that can be twisted and nuanced quite easily. So things like Italian, Indian, Chinese, Americana and British, but also hot on their heels, delivering some of that discovery and a taste adventure that we were talking about a few moments ago, things like Japanese, Middle East and Southeast Asian as well.
Yeah. And I think to build on your earlier point, Charles, we've definitely seen from our Future Food tracker that there's been a surge in demand for locally sourced produce, both when eating out and shopping in retail. So I think that mirrors what you've said for sure. The other interesting thing to come out of the tracker throughout this has been now we're slowly coming out of lockdown, veganism is on the rise again. So we did see a lot more households were consuming more meat during lockdown. Yeah. But now the restaurants are reopening, and we're seeing that customers are beginning to enjoy a bit more of a varied diet. Earing more towards plant-based now, half meat, half plant-based at home. So I think quite an interesting point.
But yeah, that's fascinating. It's so great that GSR are doing such fantastic work, keeping an eye on these trends and how they're changing so quickly and regularly as we move through the periods of lockdown. But I'm just going to move us away slightly from plant-based, because we are actually going to look at that later. And we're just going to look at a bit of health. And health is such a broad topic. We know it's been a real buzzword, this kind of food as health, for the last few years. And it is something that we could do a podcast on in and of itself. So let's just look at some of the more general trends. So, Charles, what are some of the general trends we have seen in terms of consumers' attitude to health?
Well, I mean, the onset of this global pandemic has shone a spotlight, if that needed to happen, on some of the underlying health crises that we're, as a global community, facing. Things like stress and anxiety, mental wellness, broader diet, also digestive issues. And we're really understanding that and getting to grips with the fact that our bodies are our most precious asset. And you can't take it for granted. Health is very much the new wealth, if you like. Many consumers taking an increased interest in their personal health and wellness and wanting to be as healthy as they can, particularly when it comes to supporting immunity, which is a theme that we're starting to see come through, obviously, more and more. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, which is that of body weight and BMI, and increasingly research is showing the potential link between BMI and how the virus will affect you, as well as evolving governmental policy focus as well in this particular area. So there's some of the broader things that we've seen. Kelly, what have you seen from that side?
Yeah, so throughout tracking behaviour over the pandemic, we have seen that a lot of customers are making healthier food choices, mainly eating more fresh produce and cooking from scratch. People have got much more time on their hands, so they're much more happy to be cooking from scratch. Both have dropped since the beginning of lockdown, but 53% say that they will continue to cook from scratch once out of lockdown. So it'd be really interesting for us to follow that and see if people do stick to their word on that front, or if we revert back to more convenience-led means of cooking, I guess.
Yeah. And there have been quite a few of these competing forces, Kelly, as you're talking about a bit then. And I feel like there's this force where on one side consumers are worried about their health, they want high hygiene, high health, so that if they were to get the virus, their bodies are best equipped to fight it. Versus on this other hand, we've had this kind of trend in baking during lockdown, this indulgence, you're a bit at home, gyms are closed, we're trying to cut costs, so they might be eating cheaper, typically less healthy foods. And there are these two forces, on the one side wanting to be healthy, on the other side wanting to just kind of enjoy lockdown and cut costs. And which do we feel out of these two forces is going to rule inevitably?
From my perspective, I think everything is about balance. And I think what we're seeing is that, there's been more online fitness videos than I can even ever imagine.
Yeah.
And there's been so many more Instagram posts around what people have baked and the whole banana bread piece. And I think that that's a behavioural piece that's born out of just having more time. And I think that's where they're both coming from. I can relate to this because I've done both. So I'm doing more fitness now than I've ever done, and more cooking and baking from scratch because I have more time. And that's been mimicked in our tracker, so we can see that is happening for sure. And I think what I'd like to revert back to at some point in the future, Mia, is maybe picking up on this again to see in 3, 4, 5, 6 months' time what impact that has had.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know at the moment, but when we do look at that, it'd be really interesting to see which one stays. Do they both stay? It'd be really interesting. Especially as people start getting back into the office and kids start going back to school. I think it will be really interesting to see how that pans out. But yeah. Charles, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot about, we talk a lot about trends and counter trends, and to every trend there's always a counter movement. And I think one of the really interesting things is, as time goes on, this is where we start to see habits form and become adopted. Average about 21 days to form a new habit, and then a couple of months for that to become an established behavior, and up to 250 plus days for that to be fully formed. So the longer this goes on, and the longer we've got this influence, the more likely it is to change habits over time. So we are likely to see, in our view, the longer this goes on, habits stick beyond lockdown, particularly if they deliver an additional kind of end benefit or reward. And we're particularly talking about health here and healthier minds and bodies. So if these new habits deliver those things, then they're more likely to stick over time. But some of the other behaviours that you mentioned are to us movements and counter movements. And as long as the pandemic continues, hygiene's likely to be front of mind. It's become a strategic and very visible issue. So I think we're not going to see that necessarily go away. We also mentioned things like baking. And I think one of the wonderful things about baking is, in times of uncertainty, whether that be the banana bread that you mentioned, or some of the trends around, focaccia making or sourdough making, it's a safe and comforting space for consumers and home cooks to return to. It's almost like that instinctive return to the roots of civilization. We've been making bread and fermenting foods for hundreds and thousands of years, and as you alluded to, social media platforms have overloaded with home cooks experimenting and upskilling with baking and bakery. And as such, I think consumers are discovering a new appreciation of the skill and the craft and the time that goes along with things like baking. We also know that things like cooking and baking in particular are known to have that comforting anti-stress effect as well. And as the COVID era evolves in time, I think consumers will take these experiences of lockdown into the future, where they'll have a closer affinity to food and baking in particular. And I think also, despite all of this comfort eating, and you alluded to it, Kelly, is many more of us are focused on our well-being, and many have tried new fitness and wellness practices during lockdown. And in some cases, I would say we're probably fitter and eating better than pre-pandemic, to be honest.
I'd agree with that 100%. And just an interesting stat from our COVID tracker is that 70% of people are baking more now than before lockdown. I mean, that's a massive amount.
Yeah.
And I have followed your personal journey, Charles, with what was it that you had agreed to? Cook a different meal every day, the whole of lockdown. Did you stick to that?
Yeah, I did. There's some debate about when lockdown ends. has it ended? But yeah, and I just thought it was an opportunity to indulge in something that I take a great deal of pleasure from and don't always get a lot of time to do, and that was to cook and try some things that I haven't done before. So but it started to become a bit of a rod for my own back.
Absolutely. It's been a fantastic opportunity for consumers to pick up the things that perhaps in the past they dropped, or find that balance of baking and health. And, it's been really healthy for that. So if we look at, again, things to watch, Charles, I just think that's really useful for our listeners. So if previously it was things like kombucha and acupuncture in the health sector that are really booming, what are the post-COVID health trends for those in the retail health sector? What would you say are the things to watch moving forward?
Well, many of these things are interconnected, as you'll appreciate, but we'd expect a longer term focus on the broad area of immunity and immunity boosting for obvious reasons. But there are a number of trends that we're already starting to gain momentum that play very much into that. So fortified and functional foods that support immunity with things like beta-glucans, vitamins, D, C, E and K and zinc, all very much being on the wish list. But also linked to immunity and also mental wellness as well are things like gut health. So foods that maintain a healthy gut flora, so things like pre, pro and postbiotics, and also linking back in with the wellness and BMI piece I talked about earlier on, this whole less is more fat, salt, sugar, and probably alcohol also play into that as well. So I suppose it also that highlights the broader trend situation, which is actually many of the things that we're seeing are not new. What we're seeing is a reordering of trends that may have been at a different stage of manifestation. It's really accelerated in 3 months what might have taken 2, 5, maybe in some cases 10 years to evolve. So I think we can also take some reassurance from the fact that it's more of a reordering than things that are brand new. But of course, businesses and brands need to change and shift and adapt to be able to respond to those shifts and changes that have happened very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's been a fantastic opportunity for consumers to get back in touch with their health and just kind of re-get on that health wagon. We've seen a lot of stuff like plant power and, you know, the things that you mentioned, Charles. But as we know, like there were links made during the COVID pandemic between bats as obviously an animal and COVID-19. And I think this stirred some fears, especially the media kind of did a lot of fear mongering around this, around the wider connection between animals and disease in humans. And so if we're saying that consumers are increasingly worrying about their health, have we seen a reduction in the amount of meat that's being purchased and consumed as a result of that link between bats and COVID?
I mean, it was clear that initially that we were eating more meat. I think meat gave us comfort and familiarity in the early stages of the pandemic, but however, that's very much started to plateau out. Many of the plant-based brands that we've been speaking to continue to report exponential growth. So over the long term, we'd expect the rise of plant-based and the general shift towards a plant-based diet to continue, but not at the expense of meat consumption. It's more about a focus on reduction and a drive towards quality is very much the name of the game here as far as we're concerned. Plant-based also, to your point about the link between humans and animal kind of disease transfer, although I would say we've seen no evidence of that. It's been very much reported in the media, but that plant-based also adds a hygiene halo to its list of attributes in a world where there's an added anxiety driven by the link that you've just alluded to. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you mentioned, Charles, we've got the data suggests that during lockdown people were eating more meat, and I think that's, as you say, to do with comfort, understanding of how to cook, and also I think people were looking to keep their menus as varied as possible when they're doing all the cooking. But we're now starting to see, as we're moving out of lockdown, that we are having more of a balanced diet. So I think people are probably going back to some of their their eating behaviours pre-COVID, which, yeah, for sure is more plant-based. And I think that we definitely can't ignore that movement. I know that FIS and Cubo have had a lot of projects where they've been focusing on that. So it's definitely where we're headed for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting that people are going back to, trying to reduce the amount of meat that they're eating and find again what this balance. And that seems to be a recurring theme throughout the things that we're talking about today. And what are some of the broader trends that we've seen in the plant-based consumption? So what are the trends within the plant-based communities, things to watch, things that we need to be aware of, Charles?
I mean, I think it's quite a broad topic, as you'll appreciate, and it's been one of the biggest trends over the last 3 years. I mean, highly compelling drivers of environmental and human health as well as animal welfare. And, for us, this is more of a food genre as opposed to a food trend. And we just expect the momentum to continue as we engage with both the environmental and the human health agendas, as well as that aforementioned hygiene halo I mentioned a few moments ago. It delivers against so many needs for so many consumers. But the growth of plant-based, aside from that broader social and cultural force, has been propelled by strides in industry moving forward in things like just availability, in choice and food and drink formats, and also quality from across the food and drink spectrum. Things like incredible alternatives to things like milk, but also the hard to do areas, the cakes, the bakery, the viennoiserie and the desserts, all some great brands, some great products that are all starting to normalize that principle of flexitarianism, of meat and animal product reduction. It's a focus for all retailers and brands alike.
Charles, you talk about the halo, and I know that the halo is something that is often applied to health-based foods, and those that eat those foods are considered to be, moral. It can also sometimes be applied to organic and sustainably sourced foods, but these foods often come with a higher price tag. Do you think that the consumers, that can afford those will relax their budgets, will relax about buying these things because of budgets tighten?
It's a really, really, really good question. And I firmly believe that the broader shift is towards a better understanding of our food, where it comes from and its impact on the environment and kind of broader communities. And in some cases, I agree with you, that does come from a price tag, but just doing basic things like establishing links and local supply chains with food that's being produced locally, seasonally and abundantly, but also making the right retail choice as well. Or the right choice, whether that be in retail or out of home, because certain brands have propositions that are very much rooted in products and propositions that are well sourced, that the sustainability and impact on communities is front of mind, but delivering that at an accessible price point. So I think it's about making the that kind of informed choice. I think despite optimism about recovery and the next few months as things like the furlough scheme come to an end and we see how industry and business responds more broadly, research is suggesting that finance is a major worry for consumers globally. Banks, economists are warning of the sharpest recession on record, which for some will result in changes in personal circumstances and therefore how they cook, how they eat and how they shop. So I definitely think for the foreseeable future, price, and probably more importantly than price, but value, will be the dominant factor that we can expect to see. So things like the continued renaissance of the weekly or kind of bulk grocery shopping that we've started to see, we'd expect that to continue. I think there's a real opportunity for online meal planning for the entire weekly shop, particularly for retailers to deliver healthy meals on budget without food waste. I think badging and communication and calling out seasonal foods that are abundant and therefore hopefully more economical. To core ranges, but also more entry-level products and price points with a focus on, feeding hungry families. I've been judging the Q Awards and just seeing how retailers and brands are innovating around, feeding hungry families economically and healthily. That's clearly going to be a focus over the medium term. And although luxury is going to be less important overall, there will be an opportunity to create some excitement with those little touches of luxury for those that are, we probably describe them as being cautiously extravagant, and particularly at Christmas as well. So that's my thoughts on that. Kelly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think you're definitely going to have those moments of real small but extreme indulgence. And I think, from my perspective, I've been shopping in the supermarket and seen people with calculators for the first time ever in my life. And I think that that's just a sign of, the fact that people are shopping in a different way. They're thinking about how do they get the most bang for their buck. And I think the education is improved. So people are looking for, like you say, value. They want good quality products that are healthy for them, that they don't have to pay over the odds for. And I think that's the sweet spot that, it's not rocket science, but that's what everybody's trying to aim for.
Absolutely.
And people that can do that well without compromising on taste, that's what great looks like. But it's a difficult place to get to. But from a consumer perspective, I know back in January when we plotted some of these themes, Charles, in our tracker, one of those that's really increased over the pandemic. So from April to July, we've seen that customers are much more interested and feel it's much more important to have organic produce, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It is.
They haven't really referenced the price point, so that's such intent from a price point perspective.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how that pans out over time, and whether, as we expect and would hope, that there's just this broader nudge towards considering it in the context of price and value, which for many will be front of mind, but this sort of considering where our food comes from, and who's involved and what kind of impact it is those choices are having.
Yeah, and I think, on a broader piece, people are going to make decisions on where they want to spend their money or more of their money. So they may be, obviously many people won't be going on holiday or anything this year. So what's the trade-off? Where are they are they tightening the belt across everything? Are they more likely to spend more on good quality food, less likely to spend on clothing? I think it's just about balance, in my view, 100%.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's all change. It's actually all we've got time for today. But it's been fascinating. There's the conversation that we've had, and there are lots of changes. And as you said, Charles, we're not at the end of the change. Just because we're coming out of lockdown doesn't mean that the changes have stopped. They're just starting. And I think the best advice that we can probably give to businesses in the F&B industry at this time is to just stay agile. Stay on top of what the changes are, what's going on, be a presence on social media, speak to your consumers. What do they want? How are they feeling? GSR is a fantastic business that is keeping in touch with the consumers for our clients. So if you would like to know anything more about the topics, the themes that we've discussed in today's podcast, you can visit our website or find us on social media, or ping me an email. I'm Mia at foodinnovationsolutions.com. It would be lovely to hear from you. Thank you, Charles and Kelly, for joining me today. It's been fantastic having you on, and I think definitely, Kelly, to take you up on your idea to check in 3 months' time and see where we are then.
Great. Thank you, Charles, and thank you, Mia.
Thanks. That sounds like a great idea, and thanks for inviting me to join you today. It's a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.